going to begin or start the call to order for the Redevelopment Authority Citizens Committee. Tamar, can we have a roll call, please?
Vice Chair Bregel. Member Ackerman. Member Green Wilson. Member Castens. Member Kennedy. Member Schutte.
Here.
The quorum's present.
Great, thank you. And so our next on the agenda is public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Redevelopment Authority Citizens Committee, including any matter that is not specifically included on the agenda as an action item. Mr. French.
Thank you very much, Chair,
Or
Supervisor.
I guess acting chair?
Acting Chair, seated Chair.
There you go.
Thank you. Denny French, Carson City, Nevada. I have had only a few minutes to look at this agenda. I was focused on another area of endeavor, but I do believe that this is relevant. Mexico City is going through what they consider a danger spot. Several more months they will have water and then none. And when they say none, they really do mean it. So they will be shipping it in or having it tanked in or having other facilitations. But day zero is hitting a lot of places. Mexico City is just an extreme example of such. And some of the things that they've gotten from the backflow of this or the relook and back, we should have, maybe could have, would have type things, are finding out that in their development they forgot the very important matter of having open spaces that will allow for water to settle, to go through a natural filtering system and then into their aquifers. They've asphalted and built over most of their developmental land and are now in a spot where most of their water would be runoff, and that would go back to rivers that are not necessarily sustaining their water source. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Also, I've just recently discovered, it's been in front of me for a while, but never really recognized it. It's the American Public Lands Act. And that's different than the American Land Act in that it allows places to give up property, like BLM can say, listen, Carson City needs more housing. We're going to give them property or sell it, however the negotiation goes, and then they will be able to develop, whether it's going to private or it's going to the city, it's going to be used. And so this city, we're thinking maybe going to 80,000, could actually grow up into Minden, it could grow up into Mound House, it can grow up all the way up into Osho. However, our border lines will allow us when we renegotiate the new land that we're going to be getting, whether it goes to private or it goes to whichever city gets to say, hey, we're selling it to this developer because we've been granted it. And so we have a potential of growing all over the place. So when people say we have too much maybe open space now, I go, we haven't saved it in strategically good places. We could have kept it in the floodplain, but it was private property. And so the main thing is, thank you very much for the time, but to please consider those things because we have the potential of growing all over the place. We should really think about it better. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make public comment? All right. Thank you. Next on the agenda is for possible action, approval of minutes from October 2nd, 2023. Has everyone had an opportunity to read the minutes? Are there any changes that need to take place? All right, then I would take a motion. Sorry. Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, the motion or the minutes are approved. Next on the agenda, meeting item 4A, for discussion only, discussion of redevelopment areas in Carson City including the locations, objectives, and timelines of the redevelopment areas, as well as a description of how redevelopment areas function. Hope, it's all yours.
Thank you. Commissioner Schutte asked at the last meeting that we provide just an overview on redevelopment areas since a lot of you are fairly new. And so that's what this item is about. So first, let me just say, NRS 279 provides for redevelopment areas. So the state says we're allowed to have these redevelopment areas. The way a redevelopment area works is it's often a blighted or sort of an area that's in need, let's say. And then what happens is you come up with a plan, a redevelopment plan. And I provided in the staff report on the budget some of the objectives of both of the plans, but we'll review those under this item. Then, as the property tax base increases, that incremental difference from the value that was being realized at the time the redevelopment area was put in place versus the amount that's paid as investments being made, that goes in what I'm going to call the redevelopment bucket, okay? So that belongs to the redevelopment. It doesn't go into the general fund like everything else does, right? The base amount does, but the incremental increase does not. It goes into the redevelopment bucket. And then that money is utilized to implement the redevelopment plan. Does that make sense? So in Carson City, we have 2 redevelopment areas. And I want to talk about the timing of these redevelopment areas first, because I'm sure a lot of you are saying, why haven't we been meeting? And I think the fact that these redevelopment areas have existed for so long is part of that reason. So redevelopment area 1 is primarily the downtown, but you'll see on the map it goes out to Mills Park and goes on the north side of William Street as well, and goes down to where the circle is now at Store in South Carson. So that area was established in 1986. It's going to expire in 2031. So we're in 2024. We have 7 years to go on this redevelopment area, and it's existed for a long time. So a lot of the objectives associated with the redevelopment area have been made or have been met, and for the most part, the projects being funded are infrastructure projects that don't, they get the fund, they ask for the funding, they get the funding, they pursue the project. So there's not really a need to talk about it because it's just happening. The city has had facade improvements, grant money available, but nobody's been applying for those. So it would be that RACC would meet if somebody asked for a facade improvement, but since the one over at Kaleidoscope, we haven't seen that application. So there hasn't been a need to call this committee to order. When we look at the redevelopment area, this tells you, it just describes the area. It's 488 acres, and suffice it to say, it's in the downtown area, going out to Mills Landing, Mills Park, going down south to the circle. The objectives, it's important to talk about the objectives because when we look at the budget, where the whole point of the budget is to implement this plan and to meet these objectives. So for the downtown redevelopment area, we're trying to strengthen the local economy by attracting new and expanded private investment, repair, construct, install, and replace new publicly owned utility systems, improve the street, highway, bicycle, and pedestrian circulation, which you can, if you think about the downtown and you think about what it was in 1986 versus today, you can think about the streetscapes and everything that's happened there to make those improvements. It talks about the Virginia and Truckee Roundhouse, which actually has been demolished, and creating connectivity with the downtown and the Railroad Museum. It talks about promoting the restoration of the V&T Roundhouse, which that's probably not in the cards, but what has been looked at by RACC and the Redevelopment Authority is utilizing the limestone to create an arch that would be sort of a destination, a photo op. And you've looked at that design for Mills Park. It also talks about the historic district to a certain extent and the city's rich historic past, having a unifying tree planting program. Well, the landscaping went in as part of sort of the downtown plan and the Curry Street plan. There's landscape plans there. Develop appropriately designed street lighting, street signage, and street furniture. Again, we've seen that implemented. providing informational and directional kiosks. We don't really have kiosks, but we do have some informational signs in the downtown to kind of advise you where you are. It talks about using redevelopment money for parking facilities and parking structures, for street beautification programs, building rehabilitation, and improved development requirements, intensive landscaping in the downtown properties, creating people-oriented areas. I'll mention McFadden Plaza was done as part of the downtown infrastructure project to create a people-oriented area. The undergrounding of present overhead utility systems. It was interesting, I was in a meeting today at lunch, and the people attending that meeting said one of their favorite things about Carson was the undergrounding of the utilities lines because they had an unobstructed view of the mountains. So you often think about that in terms of storms, but it also does help with the aesthetic. Still have redevelopment area 1. It was a pretty ambitious plan, right? We keep going. So it was to protect the older existing structures that have historic value, cooperate, and so that would be sort of your facade grant would help with that. To cooperate and support officially recognized historic preservation and architectural review groups, provide informational plaques, which the Visitors Bureau just did those plaques in the historic district, accommodate the planned population growth, and enhance the land use pattern to create vitality and diversity in activities, and to establish recreational opportunities. So you'll see a lot of the redevelopment money goes into the parks and recreational facilities for that. We keep going. Cooperation between the city and the school district, cooperation between the city and the state government, talks about sanitary housing and eliminating blighting influences. Redevelopment funds actually pay for half of a code enforcement officer who spends his time in the redevelopment areas identifying blight and addressing that, as well as doing parking enforcement in those areas. Okay, so that's redevelopment area 1. So it's been around a long time. There's a lot of objectives here. And when we look at the funding, we need to look at the funding in terms of these objectives. The second redevelopment area was created in 2004, and it's going to expire in 2034. This area is essentially South Carson Street going to the county line. So this doesn't have objectives, this plan has goals. So it's really focused on the auto dealers. So you can see it talks about site acquisition for the auto dealers, working with the existing auto dealers, assisting the auto dealers to relocate from other parts of the region to South Carson Street, providing inducements for auto dealers to increase the number of franchises. I think we're done with auto dealers. So we just had like 4 things on auto dealers. Then it talks about the Armory site and working with the state to sort of just kind of revitalize that site, potentially with private development. Talks about improved traffic circulation, landscaping, and streetscape. Well, we can check that box, I think. We got that done. Marketing assistance. To the best of my knowledge, we have not been involved in marketing assistance, but that may have occurred early on in the redevelopment area. Reuse of existing sites if a regional auto mall proceeds, which I wouldn't call what we have a regional auto mall. The reuse of vacant retail buildings, and talks about the former Kmart. So I said that was primarily South Carson. It actually has a satellite site, and that's the Kmart site. So that's part of redevelopment area 2, even though it's not contiguous. Utility extensions, working with property owners where NDOT owns a bunch of land. NDOT used to own a lot of land that it was bigger than the right-of-way needed to be. When the city took over that portion of right-of-way, I believe the city took over the leases on those, and a lot of those leases are being used for private endeavors. And I think in the transition from NDOT to the city, redevelopment money was utilized to assist with that. All right, Darren? Okay. And that's kind of your background on our 2 redevelopment areas. So you can see they've been around for a while. We've accomplished a lot with both of those, and we're kind of winding down a little bit. Are there any questions about the redevelopment areas?
I have a quick question. What determines the length of the redevelopment district? So how the one will be expiring in 2031?
The state law limits it to 30 years.
Okay, but it can be less, so
Yes, it
limits
can
up
be
to-
less.
Okay.
So certainly, if we felt like, for example, redevelopment area 2, say that the redevelopment authority said, you know what, we've done everything we're going to do on this. Let's just pack it up. There's the stuff that's left to do is we can do it with general fund. We don't need redevelopment anymore. Then you could sunset it early.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on redevelopment? Okay, that was the first item. I just wanted to give that brief overview, and hopefully that helped create context for our next item. Do you want to call the next item?
You bet. So nobody had any questions on that one? Okay. Then our next item to discuss is agenda item 4B for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2025 redevelopment discretionary funds, tentative budget allocations, and a recommendation to the redevelopment authority to implement redevelopment objectives. And I have a disclosure to read. NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose conflicts of interest and abstain from voting when I have a disqualifying conflict. My nephew is Chris Martinovich, who is employed by Carson City and will be presenting this item, or he won't be presenting, but he might be commenting on this item if questioned. Chris and I are not receiving compensation of any kind directly related to this item. It will not foreseeably impair or enhance the terms of his service with the city, and we are not affected by the outcome of this item to a greater degree than any other resident of Carson City. NRS 281A.420 only requires abstention in clear cases, and the independent judgment of a reasonable person in my position would not be impacted by my familial relationship. Therefore, I do not have a disqualifying conflict, and I will be voting on this matter. If you'd like to
Thank
start.
you, Hope Sullivan, Community Development Director. You'll see the table got crowded, right? I asked my colleagues to join me because there may be questions about some of the proposals, and that way they're handy and available to assist. So we have Dave Navarro to my left from Parks. To my right, Randy Rice, our city engineer, and Dave Arp, also from Parks. So I'm going to be focused primarily on page 8 of the staff report if you want to be there. But first, I'll make some remarks. The purpose of this item is for RACC to make its annual recommendation to the Redevelopment Authority concerning the discretionary funds for consideration, the FY25 redevelopment budget. So the FY25 budget will go into effect on July 1. We're starting the budget process, and RACC makes a recommendation to the Redevelopment Authority. The Redevelopment Authority establishes the budget. The city's chief financial officer anticipates that total revenue into the FY25 redevelopment account will be $3,984,432. There's currently approximately $2.2 million that's undesignated, meaning it's not assigned to a particular project. In FY25, funding for the farmers market, Christmas tree lighting, and July 4th fireworks is presented as was proposed in February 2022's 5-year plan. The funding for capital projects is being reconsidered this year, given the city's future building and space needs. So as the city's population grows, the demand for example, courtrooms increases. If we hit 60,000, we need another district court. And the city's also outgrowing many of its physical buildings. And so this has been a conversation that the Board of Supervisors has been having. And so given that a number of the buildings are in the redevelopment area and that the courthouse is in the redevelopment area, we felt it was probably wise, given that the redevelopment areas, again, are about to sunset. They're just, 5 years, 7 years, and 8 years or something left to go, that we should probably start watching the money to see if we could accumulate money to accommodate design and improvements that the city may need for physical improvements. That said, the idea would be that these funds would go into an undesignated account, just they're not designated, but they're available. If something else that wasn't a building project came forward and the redevelopment authority, well, RACC and redevelopment authority felt like it was a reasonable expenditure, the money's there and it can be spent. So what goes into the 2025 budget, it's not that that can never change. You can augment the budget. It's just the recommendation is to be really conservative and have a lot of the money not allocated so that it can accommodate a future building and space need. Is everybody with me on that? Does that make sense? Okay. In doing this, I have tried to make sure that we will be able to fulfill any contractual obligations. So if we look at the table, what you'll see is FY24 is there because in some cases there's still money in FY24 for a project, and I don't want to make an assumption that that money will be rolled over. Additionally, in the case of Public Works, there are some projects that have been funded, and they've said we simply don't have the manpower to do this project, and so we're giving you back the money. So that's why I included FY24, so that we can have clarification in which cases it would be rolled over and in which cases it would not. Okay, so if we just start, now before I go through into the table, I need to mention, I have been approached by the owner of Hyundai, which is in the South Carson redevelopment area. He is considering doing some physical improvements to the project and is curious about a facade grant. A pretty substantial facade grant, probably in the neighborhood of $90,000 as opposed to the $25,000 we usually look at. I have not included that in the budget, but I did want to advise you of that those conversations have been occurring. I don't have a capital improvement request form attached to the report from him, but that's something you may want to consider when you make your recommendation to the board or the redevelopment authority, whether or not to continue funding car dealers. And we'll talk after we go through these projects, kind of what the philosophy has been with the redevelopment authority and RACC in terms of funding single businesses versus infrastructure. Okay, so when we look at the list, we see professional services. That was funded in FY24 for $35,000. I think that funding's left over from when there were professional services associated with South Carson Street. That project's done and that funding's not necessary. Arts and culture received $50,000 in FY24. In FY25, it did ask for an increase to $60,000. My feeling was when the $50,000 was approved, it was an increase from $25,000 to $50,000 to allow the new arts and culture manager to have some funds to work with and to do some programming with. But the idea would be there would be grant money coming in to accomplish a lot of the arts and culture programming. The $50,000 from the redevelopment authority was an increase from the $25,000, and I believe it should stay at the $50,000 and not be increased. Nevada Day, $25,000, that would just stay the same. Farmers Market is a decrease. What we've been trying to do with Farmers Market since 2022 is decrease the funding annually so they can be self-sufficient. So they received $22,000 in FY24. It would be a reduction down to $20,000 in FY25. The tree lighting's been pretty consistently receiving $10,000, and it's proposed to continue to receive $10,000. The 4th of July fireworks, there was a little bit of a mistake in 2024. Parks and Rec needed to buy some or rent some porta potties at Mills Park, and I did authorize that. I was thinking it was coming out of the $15,000, but was in addition to the $15,000. So it was actually, we were able to move money around to accommodate the porta potties, but I am recommending, actually the 4th of July fireworks will not be at Mills Park, I don't believe, this July. They are not finalized on a new location, but pretty close on a new location. So I'm recommending $15,000 in FY25. Event street closures have been funded traditionally at 25,000, as have facade improvements. I am recommending that we not fund either. On the event closures, this would mean the general fund would pay for that as opposed to redevelopment when there's street closures in redevelopment areas for special events. On the facade improvement, the philosophy of the redevelopment authority, again, has been to fund infrastructure and not specific projects, or I should say, private property. We also we're not getting a lot of interest in the facade improvement program. So I'm suggesting we not fund it, and again, to put the money into the unallocated. Downtown equipment and infrastructure is if we have equipment, a bench, a trash can that breaks, we have money to get it fixed. So I think that's the right thing to do, is to fund that. The utility extension sidewalk replacement was funded at 20,000. That was funded if somebody was doing a project in the redevelopment area, a development project, and they had to they had to extend the utilities or do an improvement to the sidewalk, say a handicap ramp or something. This money would be available to help subsidize that improvement. No one has used this money, and so I'm suggesting that not be funded. Parks did ask, or they did have a balance of slightly more than 19,000 in FY24 that had been carried over from previous years. They made a request for 25,000. I'm suggesting that the 25,000 not be funded. The 19,601 is still in place, and they have encumbered that money and have contracts let to utilize those funds. The Bob Boldrick light boards, the request for FY25 is 26,000. My understanding is those light boards that exist have reached their lifetime. They can't be fixed. The parts don't exist. They need to be replaced. And so the 26,000 would accommodate that request, and I do support that request. The engine house arches. This was originally funded at $250,000. The budget went up. In FY24, we were looking at 612,000, a little more than that. The request from Public Works is to roll those funds forward to pursue the project. I am recommending we not pursue this project. This project has gotten very expensive. I think there's other needs in the city. However, I am recommending rolling forward 100,000 to fulfill any contractual obligations. On the Jack Transit Center, in FY24, they were funded at 100,000. It's anticipated that that work will occur this fiscal year, and there is not a request in FY25 for the Jack Transit Center. Colorado Street in FY24 had a little bit more than $250,000. The request is to roll the funds forward, and I do agree with that. The project is complete, but the final payment's pending, so that will allow for meeting contractual obligations. The Bob Boldrick ADA, they have a little more than 200,000 from FY24. They've requested to roll the funds forward, and I agree with rolling those funds forward. A contract for the design has been approved by the Redevelopment Authority. Given that the design work's just being done, we don't know what the cost for actual execution of that design will be because the design doesn't exist yet. Fuji Park improvements, the balance in FY24 is about 171,000. They've requested to roll the funds forward. I'm recommending rolling forward 50,000 to fulfill existing obligations. Mills Park walkways, right now for FY24, there's 150,000. The request for FY25 is 100,000. I'm recommending FY25 budgeted item of 75,000, which the previous two fiscal years were 75. So the first 75,000 wasn't spent in FY23, so it went into the FY24. Third Street parking lot, the project's complete, but final payment has not been made, so I'm suggesting those funds be rolled over to meet contractual obligations. Sidewalk and ADA improvements. FY24 was 200,000. The request for FY25 is 400,000. I'm recommending budgeting or funding at 200,000. East William Street, complete streets. That project is happening. In FY '24, it has $785,000. I do support rolling that over, and that should be under construction this year, early next year. Downtown sidewalks, 485 or 45,000. The suggestion was to move that to the sidewalk and ADA line item, and I am not supporting funding that. I'm supporting the funding of the sidewalk and ADA improvements at 200,000, as I just reviewed. Roop Street improvements, this is a request for 800,000 for FY '25. I am supporting the request for the 800,000, and that request is attached to your staff report. Storage Street improvements, in FY '24, it was a little more than 125,000. Public Works has advised they don't have the manpower to pursue that project, and there's no rollover request. So that funding would go into undesignated. Mustard Street improvements in the Mustard Street Rapid, what's it stand for, Rapid? Yes, the flashing beacon. Those projects are both anticipated to begin in May 2024, so there is a balance there, and I will support rolling over those funds to meet all contractual obligations, so those projects would occur. North Carson Complete Streets, there's a request for 100,000 in FY '25, and I support that request. And there's a detailed description, I believe, attached to the report. The Downtown Gateway feature, that contract's been let for 199,300, and so I do support rolling over those funds to meet the contractual obligation. The Community Center HVAC was a little over $1 million funded in FY '24. They have requested to roll over those funds, and I do support rolling over those funds from FY '24. The Community Center ADA door was funded in FY '24, and that project's complete. The Community Center interior signs was funded in FY '24 for 20,000. The requisition's been issued on that. The downtown trash enclosure project was funded in FY '24 for 25,000. That project will not be pursued, so that money will go into undesignated. The Roberts House exterior door was funded in FY '24. It's for 67,000. Public Works is pursuing that project, so I do support rolling that over if that hasn't been spent. The Roberts House fence is complete, and Max Texera sound system was funded in FY '24 for 50,000. It has not been pursued, and that project simply won't be pursued, and that 50,000 would go into undesignated. So this was a bit different. A lot of you are new, but a bit different because usually we don't, everything gets rolled over so that the project can continue. So this is different, but I think it's really important as we get near the end of these redevelopment areas to look at what the real needs are in terms of building and space needs and try to save a little bit of money to accommodate those. I'm happy, let me just say a couple other things and then I'll stop. Okay, so the general policy of RACC and the Redevelopment Authority, is to use the discretionary redevelopment funds for infrastructure projects to benefit the general public and provide support to existing property rather than providing incentives directly to individual property owners, businesses, or events. So you'll see with the farmers market, we're trying to lessen the amount of money that we give them so that they can be self-sufficient. 4th of July fireworks, the tree lighting, those can't be ticketed events. Of course, the whole community can come out. You can't control who's going to that event. So the city has kept that funding consistent, or I should say the Redevelopment Authority has kept that funding consistent. And again, given the space needs, we are looking at really keeping the number of projects that are funded pretty limited. The folks who are advocating for the funding are at the table with me if you have questions for them, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions as well.
Are there any questions from anyone?
So with the farmers market, we want it to be self-sufficient by the time we're ending that redevelopment area in 2034, right?
It would be okay if it was self-sufficient before then,
Okay.
but we haven't been really aggressive in
Mhm.
reducing the payment.
Yeah, so if we're looking to wean them off within the next 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like 2,000 a year, a fiscal year,
Mm-hmm.
may not be enough to force them into that self-sufficiency.
No, that's a really good point. And what I didn't mention, although it's in the report, I believe, is what we need to do. Right now, what we're doing is we're looking at the FY25 budget and your budget recommendation to redevelopment. At a future meeting, and actually, we need to have a future meeting because you have to elect a chair, we can look at a 5-year projection so that Parks and Rec and Public Works can start saying, okay, you're saving money for these space needs and these building needs, but we still have our needs, and we want to know, given this new climate, that we're trying not to allocate all the money. Let us start planning for 5 years out so that we can do projects like North Carson Street and William Street and other projects that redevelopment absolutely supports. We're just trying to shrink the number of projects, so to speak. So yeah, I think as part of the 5-year kind of projection of what redevelopment or the redevelopment plan, we could say for 5 years, we can look at how aggressively we reduce that funding.
Well, I have a couple of questions regarding the event street closure. And it doesn't show a request. I'm just, within the spirit of redevelopment and bringing in, activity and business activity and community activity, I'm struggling with this one a little bit. What is the typical cost, or do you know the cost? And I'm sorry I didn't reach out and ask that prior, from last year or the last couple of years? Just a ballpark figure.
Darren Schultz for the record, Public Works. It really varies depending on the event because, small ones, one block is much less in terms of putting out some barricades. Bigger events where we have to actually be out there and man the closures obviously will cost more. Nevada Day is, 20,000 plus for us. But when they're just closing a block, Telegraph, Corner, that sort of stuff, those 4 blocks, that's something that we can do for a few $1,000s.
Okay. Coming out of the general fund, that's also money that could go to space needs. So that's where I'm struggling a little bit on this, since there is money. Thank you, by the way, since redevelopment is specifically earmarked to support things like this. So I think I would be more comfortable putting that back.
Oh, and just to be clear, the reason there's not a request is the requests tend to be for capital projects.
Okay.
So that's why.
Okay.
I think there was probably an assumption this would be funded and not an assumption that this was on the table
Right.
for cutting.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the park signs, so it's a 19,601. That is still here then. That's still available. So the fact that the recommendation is to not to fund or add 25,000. Would that have been in addition to the 19? So then you, okay. Or,
Correct.
okay, thank you. And so what's available then is 19.6 if we don't fund the 25,000. I am in absolute support to roll over the 600,000. Or I mean, not roll over 600, but roll over 100,000 for the arch. as a Carson City native, my heart was broken when the roundhouse was demolished. That said, this whole project is getting so expensive, and I think we have an opportunity to look at it creatively from a different perspective. And while the money that has gone into it thus far, I know sometimes people would think of that as wasted money. I don't see it as wasted money because it has generated ideas, and it has been kind of a fact-finding of what can work and what might not work. And so while that is difficult, I feel that's appropriate. Regarding the Fuji Park improvements, if 50,000 are rolled over, so if I'm understanding correctly, then the other would be reabsorbed?
It would go into the unallocated.
Okay. How does that impact what's happening or the plan for the Fuji Plan Master Park? Or, sorry.
Yes, for the record, Dave Navarro, Parks Operations Superintendent. Let's see, that would, the only way that it would impact right now is that if the 50,000 were to roll over, we would still be able to put together a design for future improvements to the arena.
Okay.
So obviously, if we didn't have any more funding after that, we would have to try to find some funding to make those improvements then after we go through the design process.
Okay, so this sounds a little dramatic. It's the wrong word, but it's not catastrophic.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
The Mills Park walkways, this one, will these walkways be covered if the grant is awarded for the Mills Park Master Plan? And I know that hasn't been awarded yet. Is that a possibility?
Let's see, again, for the record, this is Dave Navarro, Parks Operations Superintendent. So what we have done with those requests is we have identified areas that would be outside of the improvements from the master plan.
Okay,
Okay, so yes, so those requests are taking care of areas that are outside of that.
okay. And so 100,000, the request, this one I was a little confused on. So the 2024 was 150,000. This year's request is 100,000. The recommendation is to award 75,000. Is there any left in the 2024 funding? Or
To answer your question, and I think the current funding that is available now, we do have a contract in place for one of those amounts, which is the previous year that got rolled over. The funding for this year, we've had some difficulties getting concrete contractors. We reached out to the contractors in the middle of summer. They tried to complete some of the projects in the fall and just ran out of time. Their schedule was already booked out.
anyway.
And so so we do have a contract now for a contract to come in and finish. So we're waiting for that contractor to finish, and then we're gonna go out with the other 75,000, I'd like to bid on some other areas that have already been designated.
Okay, but you have the funding to finish the initial contract.
Correct.
Okay, and then the 75,000 would then open up new opportunities.
Correct.
Okay, great. Regarding the sidewalk ADA improvement, Randy, thank you for the conversation today. And I just want to, I feel very strongly about being able to leverage grant funding And so this one, while I absolutely appreciate and understand and support putting in as much money as possible into undesignated in order for space needs, would the 200,000, if that's what was, if that's our recommendation, does that still give you an opportunity to leverage funds? Because I don't want to not have access to money that otherwise we could.
Yeah, Randy Rice, city engineer for the record. Absolutely. Obviously, the more the merrier. We have quite a deficit. Many of you were not here for my presentation in 2021, but I think at one point our group put together kind of a roadmap on how long it would take us to get us up to compliance on our ADA, and it was something like 151 years based on our current spending. And so obviously we'll all be we'll all be gone before that can happen. And so one of the reasons we came to this group for support was to look for other funding sources to help reduce that number and help improve access to our citizens. And so with that being the case, obviously we've requested 400, but 200 will be great. We'll leverage that with our FTA grants to our best of our ability and do whatever we can. So we'd appreciate anything you guys would consider.
I know that during board meetings, Supervisor White especially is really, really supportive, and I am as well in terms of the infrastructure and the sidewalks and all. Would it be a huge hit if we at least upped it to 250,000, just to give a little bit more? Okay, and I think that just to give a little bit more wiggle room, I think that would be appropriate.
And just one more thing to fill in there, you'll see, or maybe you saw it in the slide previously on page, I think it's page 8, down below, there's a line item that says downtown sidewalks. So as we
Right.
create new projects, what we do is we pull that money out of the sidewalk and ADA improvement line item and
Mhm.
create a new project and put that money into it.
Okay,
And what we're finding is that prices tend to vary, especially on smaller projects. As you can imagine, when you bring equipment and tools and fuel, the bigger the project, the more economy of scale you get. So for a smaller project, we don't get that economy of scale. And so a ramp can cost anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000, which 10 years ago, they used to cost us $2,500, right? So prices have blown up astronomically. And so what we would like to do is move that money forward every year that we don't spend. So the way a project typically works, and let's say we take 200,000, for example, we would try to design a project around that $200,000 budget. Then we typically take about 10% of that towards what we call contingencies, and those to account for unknown conditions. And that's generally utilities. It could be fire hydrants or things that are just hidden below the surface that we just can't account for. And you would spend too much money trying to get the project perfect rather than just having some money set aside to account for those unknowns. And so oftentimes we do a good job and really find no surprises, and that 20,000 may be left over. So in that case, we would roll that money forward to the next year and plan on implementing that and supplementing the next year's budget. So ideally, if this commission thinks it's appropriate, we'd like to utilize that 250,000 that you're discussing putting into the budget. Anything that doesn't get spent would just get rolled forward to the next year, year over year. And then some years we may go too much, some years we may go not enough. And if we need a little bit extra, we would borrow from that previous year so we can have that project go to fruition.
great, thank you. I'm comfortable with that. And I think that is all of my questions. Did anyone else have any comments?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. So the downtown sidewalks project, you're going to move that money into sidewalk and ADA improvement. Is that correct? That's the plan.
That was the intent, yes.
Thank you.
As far as the community center HVAC goes, I wasn't here when we issued those funds. Is that something we're holding on to and waiting for the HVAC to go out, or, okay.
Yeah, again, Reddy Rice, city engineer for the record. So that project accounts for, I think there are, and don't quote me on this, there's something like 24 units on top of this building. Over the last couple of years, we've gone ahead and tackled, I think, 3 or 4 of them already with facilities money and through general fund, getting those funded through the CIP process. There are still something like 18 units left up there that needed to be improved. Thankfully, the numbers that we're getting preliminarily are much lower than the money we have allocated here. So what we'd like to do is roll that money forward, see what the actual bids come in at, get that project funded and awarded, and then any remaining money would come back to the RACC fund.
All right. Discussion, or what are the thoughts of the board members?
Member Kennedy here. I'm in agreement with the sidewalk ADA improvement, increasing it to 250,000. I think that's a good idea. Also, can I get some clarity on the engine house arch? So is this project going away? What are we doing?
Yeah, so as Supervisor Schutte mentioned, this project has been both fun and aggravating at the same time. We have learned and discovered a number of challenges with the project, and so that's why we came back. I think we presented this project originally in 2021, came back again in 2022 and asked for a little bit more money. We let the project out for bid. The bid prices came back astronomical, and so one of the questions we asked a number of the bidders was, what's the problem? Why is this so expensive? And so we've actually been working with them for the better part of 3 to 6 months to essentially redesign the structural elements and the facade. One of the things or problems that we've discovered as well is the nature of the sandstone is in pretty poor condition, and really not the best use of the stone at this point to use it as a structural member. So the current process that we're working on is actually an engineered natural stone, which is significantly cheaper actually than just cutting up the regular stone, which was a surprise. So we do have a good path forward there. However, in light of some of the comments, public comments that have been coming out against art, the need for this money to fund other sources, we do understand that as of right now, we have spent and obligated and encumbered about $100,000 worth of funds. So if this project does go away, then yes, we would just ask for that $100,000 to pay off those existing obligations. But yes, this project would then essentially go away until a future date. But we do still have the design. So if this commission changes its mind or something changes in the future, happy to dig those back up and start again.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Acting Chair, if you all also can talk about the facade grant vis-a-vis Hyundai and kind of the interest they've expressed in potentially obtaining redevelopment monies for a facade grant, because it'd be good to have a recommendation from RACC relative to your, or on the record discussion as to your thoughts on that.
Okay, I know historically, we have funded 25,000 for the facade grants, and what it has been is a match. It definitely, I think there's value in that, as it does help beautify different areas. I'm struggling a bit with a facade grant of 90,000 potentially, again, in light of other more pressing matters. You know, I definitely, and please pipe in, in light of, for example, space needs, and once we get to 60,000, we're required by NRS to have another courtroom, and so there is money that we absolutely have to spend, and so I feel that is at this point a more appropriate use, not to undermine the idea behind the facade grant, but I think in terms of priorities, right now is it kind of falls back on the priority. That's just my view.
I actually agree with that. Has there ever been a time in RACC that we spent more than 25,000 for facade improvement?
Not to my knowledge. That said, there are historically, RAC used to provide funding for physical improvements to businesses.
Right.
So Todd Reese is here. He and I have been working on a situation where the funding should have been repaid because the business closed within 2 years. I believe that was about 67,000. It was about 70,000, up to a $70,000 award. Is that your recollection on the number? I think it was that. So essentially, RAC was making money available to private businesses, not necessarily just for facade grants, but in excess of 25,000. The city also entered into agreements with various car dealers.
Right.
And so, and that is still, that still appears on the budget. So I just wanted to, in terms of a facade grant specifically, I can't say, but I do know the city did enter into contracts with other businesses, but the city also has been very clear that that's not how they want to conduct business anymore, and their intent is to pay for infrastructure that benefits the general public as opposed to a particular business.
Right. They haven't made an official request for it, correct?
No, but I'll sort of take some blame for that because he has submitted information, and he has explained what he'd like to do. I just haven't had him make an official request.
I think it is difficult, though, to make a determination or even a recommendation without really learning the why behind the request. I think that's always really important, and because the idea behind a facade grant or even the redevelopment district is to encourage investment, is to invite community members to visit the different businesses, because ultimately we benefit from that. So I'm not like, I think I don't want to close the door. I think we would need to really get to the why behind the request.
I think if we had the request in front of us, it'd be better we'd have more information to make a better decision. I don't think we have enough in front of us to really make a real good decision. We could probably leave the door open for down the road. And when they make a formal request, we can kind of look at it and make a better decision at that point. That would be my suggestion moving forward.
And would it come with a specific plan as to what the $90,000 is?
Yeah, he has very specific plans.
And are they facade or are they like capital improvements to
They're
his property?
capital improvements that exceed 90,000.
Well, and it seems like the redevelopment area did put importance into the auto dealerships
Right.
when they came about. So it's something that we should at least look at and think about, but maybe compromise and tell them 25,000 is what you get, but without seeing
Well,
it.
what I can do then is I'll contact him and we'll have another RAC meeting. We'll talk about the 5-year plan, and we can look at this request, and you can make a recommendation to the redevelopment authority.
I think that's the best move. Then we'll all have the information in front of us. We can make a better decision.
And be respectful of the spirit of the redevelopment
Thank you.
Districts. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments or anything else that our esteemed panel would like to add?
One more thing about the fireworks. So the decrease is due to the porta potties that had to be rented, and we don't need them this year. Is that correct?
She will have porta potties, but what I'm doing is recommending that consistency between 24 and 25. And I was just explaining why the 24 funding went up a little bit. It
Sure.
was my
It
misunderstanding.
was a porta potty windfall.
Right, exactly. No, I don't have any more questions. I think I'm good to go.
All right.
I know it wasn't really addressed in the packet, but can we talk about the Kmart area? Because I know that it's been added recently. Is there anything we can do to help over there? It just seems to get more destitute every day. The parking lot's falling apart.
Well, it's interesting because you do fund a .5 code compliance officer. And so what I can do is send him over to see if it appears to be blighted. I agree the parking lot could be a lot better. So he can look at some sort of facelift type stuff if it's a blight and start pursuing some type of code enforcement. I don't know about coming up with funding other than that, only because that's helping a private property owner as opposed to the public at large.
Mm-hmm. I did drive by today, and the stop sign is down when you're going off onto Winnie or College Parkway. Mm-hmm.
We
Somebody
can,
ran
yeah, we can take a
over it.
look at that.
Okay.
And then one other thing I'll mention is in your packet, you saw that there was a request for 100,000 for the North Carson Street study area. So that is the final project on the tax plan that the Board of Supervisors, I believe, set up in 2014. And so with that initial study, what we'll do is we'll look at it like a scoping level study and identify areas of the road that might be able to be necked down, reduce some of the pavement out there, but also look at sidewalk connectivity, ADA improvements, lighting, landscaping, et cetera. So one of the things I've talked with some of the commissioners here about tonight is what does that look like and how can it improve that area? And I think, traffic circulation, making sure we have safety measures in place that actually match the way the corridor is being used today versus how it was set up, many, many years ago. Those are all things that we can do with some of these funds. And so what I will say is, although there are priorities today, as we come forward in the future, once we get those scoping studies done, we may come back to this board and request additional money, and that's typically what those will be for. We've supported South Carson Street and also East William Street in this manner, and likely would foresee another request in the future, probably a year or two down the road once we get that process a little more formalized and once we get through the construction of East William Street.
Perfect.
All right, well, is someone prepared to try a motion?
Sure. The event closure, you wanted to add something to that?
I would like to continue the $25,000, and perhaps it'll be used, perhaps it won't be, but I feel in the spirit of the redevelopment district, it's a good use of money.
I'm okay with that. We can readdress it dust next year. So we can add that. So the only two changes that I see are the event closure and the sidewalk and ADA improvement. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay, so then we can make a motion for that. Is that correct?
Would that work, or do you need
Right,
a-
for the benefit of the record, I think what you're suggesting is to modify staff's recommendation to add $25,000 for the event street closure in FY '25 and to modify the funding in FY '25 for sidewalk and ADA improvements to increase it from 200,000 to 250,000. And just to clarify, there would be no change to the downtown sidewalks. That would continue to not receive funding because the sidewalk and ADA improvements would be funded at $250,000.
Correct.
Yes.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
A double second? All in favor? Aye. Say aye. Sorry. Anyone opposed, say nay. Okay, it passes, the recommendations pass.
Member Shooty?
Yes,
Was it Member Kennedy and Member Ackerman?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Just
Sorry.
want to make,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda, discussion only, staff reports and updates. And thank you, everyone.
Okay, it's good to see everybody. We haven't met, but now we have to meet. So we will meet and we will, I'll speak to the business owner about coming. And I'm just curious if you can let me know if the 5 o'clock start's working for you, if you prefer the 5:30 start. And if the 5 o'clock starts, good, maybe we'll just stay with that, just, it's kind of easy. For some reason mentally, I always think 5 o'clock. And then, I'll work with my colleagues on a 5-year plan, so they can plan what their projects are, and they can sort of have some reliability on the redevelopment money. But again, we have to hold back a little bit of money for the space needs. And I think that's all I have. So I'm sorry we haven't met, but we'll meet some more. Okay, thanks.
Okay, then we are to the next, or RAC member reports and comments. Anything anyone would like to add?
No, I'm okay.
I like the 5 o'clock start.
I
5
do like
o'clock.
the 5 o'clock start.
Okay.
I will add that.
Is that okay with, okay, great. All right, and public comment. Public is invited at this time to comment and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the RAC, including any matter that is not specifically included on the agenda. And you have a 3-minute.
Hi, thank you,
Hello.
Denny French, Carson City, Nevada. I'd like to suggest that my having gotten a chance to look at page 2 of the background and accelerated recommendations of the development, I felt it was unfortunate that the bus had not considered it was improving street and highway cycling, develop a physical linkage and appropriate transportation modes among the Virginia and Truckee, Roundhouse, et cetera. But my main thing is that this infrastructure really didn't include as much transportation as I would like for public use. I would like money put aside for reconsiderations of their structure, their bus stops. I don't feel that they're safe, and I think their designs could be reconsidered to allow people utilizing them to have a better view of buses coming, advertisements in the way. Structurally, I think that they're a safety hazard. So I've been promoting that they make some considerations, and I'm sorry they didn't make a proposal for some funds to adequately address my concerns. My concerns are that if I can't go in there and feel safe, nobody else is going to, because I'm sort of the canary in the mine. If I have a sensitivity to something, it's usually shared with others. Not that but I'm not that unique is what I'm trying to say. I also am a bit discouraged by the way things were laid out in the agenda. I had trouble accessing some of the material, and I think that's me, and I'll figure it out. But I also would like to really have had some input in this conversation before you went to your final vote. I think that the things that were brought up would have helped me to have understood if I were able to at least address some of the people that were able to have answered questions as they came up. Not that I needed to get heavy-winded about it, but I guess I'm just feeling that there's so much in here that individually has caveats and different things that I don't feel were covered well enough. Saying, hey, WNC's looking to expand its activities and its educational opportunities. Kmart would be a perfect opportunity to expand their recreational for their sports. It also would help them to get further into their medical. They have limited space for them to expand, and I'd like to see it utilized, and I'm not hearing any of that, so I'm throwing that out, and it's not part of this discussion. But I appreciate the opportunity tonight, but I would have liked a little space in there for public request and consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then I think that that concludes our meeting. So
Making
I'd like to
motion to
adjourn.
adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion
Thank
to
you.
adjourn. Second.